Hey everybody, welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan. I am the general counsel for Chain Argus. With me, as usual, every week, our CEO and chief data scientist, John Ryder. I'm glad to have him on. Glad that you guys have tuned in, and we appreciate that. And what do we have for you this week? Of course, uh, I think the SEC, that's the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, published some kind of a staff statement. I think, if I'm not wrong, about a week back or so on DeFi interfaces, and what it would mean where you need to get yourself registered as a broker dealer. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that, and also we're gonna maybe do a little bit of a dive into, do any of the current interfaces actually meet those requirements? But bear in mind that's not, well, we'll get into that. Next, we're going to talk about Justin Sun, um, and the World Liberty Finance and the WLFI tokens, and he's been quite public out there going on about how he I gotta be careful what words I choose for this, but was not given what he was promised when it came to that investment and that
Well, he
situation.
believes he was wronged. I think
He
that's a
believed he
fair.
was wrong.
It's a
Yeah.
nuanced characterization.
Yes, he believes he was wronged, and let's just jump into that a little bit. And some of the I don't want to use the word restitution measures that are being proposed, but some of the subsequent plans, I guess, that are going to be
Ramifications.
implemented. Yeah. And then finally, we're going to talk about the EU developments and this tension between the European Commission and the European Central Bank. And this has been a long-running thing. The crypto stuff is just an additional sort of point of contact in this ongoing sort of fisticuffs between all these European style institutions. And of course, it kind of, for those who are not super familiar with how Europe operates, it kind of just exposes some of the fragilities and idiosyncrasies with the union, which just a shout out to Lee Kuan Yew, who was the former Prime Minister of Singapore. He spoke about that at length some time ago in his best-selling book called One Man's View of the World. Um, so,
Well, I
so
mean, in that case, his view was that dozens of countries with very different traditions and histories trying to have a common legal system and market might run into some difficulties, which is fair enough. I don't think that was among his more controversial
No, it's not
social
controversial.
views.
He was
Yeah,
just basically stating the obvious.
yeah, yeah. He was, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
pretty
let's
confident.
let's jump straight into the SECs and DeFi interfaces. So just to give a bit of context to the listeners and those tuning in, a DeFi interface would be something like Uniswap, I guess, or which is
Well,
decentralizing.
the web front end.
The web front
Yeah,
end, yeah,
the web front
or even MetaMask. MetaMask wallet, the software extension could be considered a DeFi interface. So what does this staff statement say?
Well, yeah, so MetaMask swap. So we got to be careful.
Yeah,
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 so they're speaking
yeah.
specifically about whether or not certain types of interfaces require broker-dealer registrations.
Correct.
So the pure self-custody wallet portion of stuff is unlikely to run afoul of any of these rules because, for example, one of the issues is if you route orders. Well, a self-custody wallet doesn't route orders. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas, a thing that provides trading might conceivably. So these are the properties that your system needs to have so that you're exempt from needing to register as a broker dealer. So one of the properties is you don't handle securities. Fair enough. I mean,
Okay.
that's obvious, right? Because you're dealing in securities, you're a securities broker, whatever. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff about the way the routing works, where the market data comes from, how much the user knows about what's going to happen. Um, so there, I think it's instructive maybe to read one of the
I think it says things
inter-
like you can't post things like best price, best
yeah,
execution.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you can't exercise any discretion, right? So you
Yeah.
can't decide what's best. You can't say best price, best
You can't say
execution, that
best
kind of thing.
price, you can't say best execution.
And to the extent that the covered user interface displays only one potential execution route, the covered user interface provides the user the ability to see additional routes. So there's a lot of stuff where it says, I guess acknowledging business realities, you can have a bunch of defaults, but it
Yeah,
needs to be
yeah,
possible
yeah,
to
yeah.
run essentially all the defaults and reconfigure it to focus on anything you want and give complete access to every step of the process to the user, control over everything, disclose all the stuff. Now, I think that's interesting because if you have a front end that isn't compatible with certain backends, how are you required to make it configurable? Um, is it okay to have a backend that's not really completely public and open source? And so your front end works with that one, but it won't work with many others. And there are a lot of confusing edge cases here, and I'm not aware of any of these systems that allow full configurability like that. As
Not
we've
to my
discussed
knowledge. Yeah.
with respect to MetaMask a couple of times, one of the reasons we're assuming that some of the components are not open source is that the routers for swap and whatnot, because the fees have to get extracted somehow, right? The same thing, we assume parts of Coinbase Wallet, the old Coinbase Wallet, not the new Coinbase Wallet, the one that wasn't at all open source, that was just built on an open source toolkit or something. The assumption was that you need to be able to extract the fees. And if you can just publish it and people can change the fee address or zero the fee rate, so you have software that's configurable, and then the version you deploy has the fee address and the fee rate and everything built in. It's minor, but non-trivial. Yes, none of that's allowed really here. You need to be able to override and configure and see everything. I wonder if that's true for any of them, really. And there's a real question about, pick a product swap function. You can't redirect it to any backend you want because they all
Mm,
work differently.
yeah.
How's that supposed to? There's no discussion of any of that. It's all very basic because, again, if you think of the way routing orders worked in the old days, a person was doing the routing, taking the phone call, and I can call anyone else with a phone and I can try to trade with them. Whereas if it has to be an API integration, I agree that that's not the same.
Yes.
Right. I can't make my front end configurable to handle any back end. Whereas as long as both people speak the same language, you get one trader on the phone with another, they'll figure out how to, the API is a bit more flexible, right? Humans are not. Right. So
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
it's true.
know what's intended there and how that's supposed to work.
Well,
And then there's no editorial comments about what's best. All the market data has to be unfiltered. You have to be able to change your market data sources.
hmm.
Seriously? Okay, interesting. Yeah, so they seem to want to say that you're exempt from these things if you really are just a piece of infrastructure that the user can configure in absolutely any way that they want. And I think that you're going to find, for example, one requirement there is that users can go in and delete the fees. So, wonder how many businesses are going to be okay with their flagship product allowing users to not pay them anything for it. Maybe they'll start running ads. That wasn't a joke though, right?
No,
That's
no,
the
I know, I know.
solution.
That's actually
We
a
know
pretty good
what's going to
idea.
happen. We know what's going to happen.
That's actually a pretty
So
good idea.
maybe that's what they want. But of course,
What?
you can't run ads that promote any of these materials and still get exempt, which is why brokers charge fees and don't run that. We've been down this road. That's why the regime is what the regime is.
Well, I
So
mean,
because a
as it
lot of
currently
brokers,
stands, I would struggle unless you have information that I do not, but I would struggle to point to anyone, any piece of sort of swapping software that is currently available that satisfies those requirements.
I mean, there are questions around what the earlier comments about what does configurable really mean, right? And yeah, there's nothing that is arbitrarily configurable, just attached to any backend. No, that doesn't work. Are there things where you can make some changes? Maybe do you have to recompile if I have to download a bunch of code and rebuild, and then what? You have to root the phone to install a non-standard APK? Like, how is this supposed to work?
I and given that the SEC generally operates by regulatory enforcement actions, I actually think that this flips the flips the equation on the opposite side, where you might look at this and go like, oh, okay, this is great. They're giving some clarity through the statements. In fact, if nothing else, they've made this thing broad enough that if they want to get you, they can, um, because they made it quite clear
Oh,
that
it
it's
would be straightforward to submit claims to the SEC that various platforms require registration under this guidance and that they weren't registered, and just provide them with very simple examples of where the code or whatever user interface didn't allow the configurability. There's no chance they're going to do anything about that at the
yeah,
moment. I suspect that a future regime that decides it wants to behave differently isn't going to believe this staff statement is operative anyway. So,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
correct. It's not, I mean, I want to be clear that this is not uh it's interpretive. It's not even interpretive. It's more like I don't know, footnotes to the Bible, I guess. I don't know.
yeah, I mean, it's instructions from a police officer that doesn't want to arrest anyone ever as to how to not violate the law. And
Hmm.
when that person will eventually be replaced by someone with a different agenda because no political system, whatever thing lasts forever. They're probably not going to care what these rules say anyway. So, if somebody wants to waste a bunch of time identifying a bunch of non-compliant interfaces that will never be pursued under this basis, enjoy yourself. But
Yeah. Okay, let's
it'd be
switch gears.
entertaining though.
Yeah, but costly.
There might be people who also add fields to make it possible for you to stop paying them fees. That
Yes.
that might be a response from some people. So if
And
you're
and,
interested in that,
and you know,
let me know.
it's also possible. The assumption, of course, is that people will never choose to pay fees. I mean, there are plenty of services which rely on donations. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, if your choice is between using a version of product X and a slightly modified version of product X somebody else has already produced that charges no fees, that's going to be the one that gets all the use.
yeah,
I mean,
the odds are that, yeah, but maybe I don't know, maybe you could put
there'll
ads.
just be forks of all these things on GitHub that are just XYZ blah, 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 dash no fees, right? That's
Yeah,
what should end up. That's possible.
yeah, possible. Okay, switching gears a little bit. Justin Sun of Tron slash USDD slash what was
Yes, I guess I don't know
BitTorrent.
if we covered this or not, but this was in the news or whatever a while ago, right? So Justin Sun bought a bunch of these WLFI, which are somewhat Trump affiliated, whatever token things.
Well, he is on the
And
website. I think it's a little bit more than
he's on the
affiliated.
website, isn't it?
He was on the website. He's been since removed.
Why is it removed? Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. They took down the personnel page.
His tokens were frozen,
Yeah.
and it was
Justin Sun,
partisan
not
general
Trump.
claim.
Justin Sun.
Justin Sun's
Yeah. It's about
token. Yeah,
$75 million dollars worth of
there was
tokens
yeah. Well, at the time, I think they're
at the
now worth
time. Now I don't know what they're
zero.
worth.
They're worth zero now. The price has dropped slightly. They were frozen, and he was saying this is robbery, and they were roughly speaking indirectly justified by well, we froze people with suspicious financial whatever dealings. Um, Honestly, both people on that one have a little bit of a point, right?
Yeah.
Investing in a project and then having them say, yeah, we're seizing this stuff we just sold you because we think you're a criminal when you're someone who's been credibly accused of committing crimes. And I'm not saying he's guilty of committing crime, but he's definitely credibly been,
He's definitely been
accused,
accused.
court processes and paid fines and whatever. So, that's the type of person that some financial institutions will not want anything to do with. World Liberty Financial is a financial institution. It's in the name.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not a bank, right? But it's a whatever. It's a financial institution. Yeah, so they have a little bit of a point that maybe maybe you shouldn't have taken equity from this guy, and I don't think you can credibly claim you didn't know in advance. But whatever, that's how it works. Sometimes well, whatever. Yeah, so he complained, and around a similar time, there were some revelations, such as it is that the WLFI team, treasury, developers, whatever, had pledged a bunch of their tokens to a lending protocol to borrow stablecoins against it. And they've subsequently confirmed they are I think they're an anchor borrower. I believe they use the term anchor, not anchor protocol as in Luna, but
Yeah, yeah, I know.
as in foundational, whatever, some
Yeah.
protocol. And yeah, they borrowed a
Cornerstone.
bunch of, yeah. And what's wrong with that? Obviously, that was not well received either. And they revamped their
Uh-huh.
whole token scheme to change the allocations yet again. There have been continual allegations. Allegations is probably not the right word because that's too soft. It has definitely been the case that there have been significant changes in the way WLFI works without on-chain governance votes. And we can say that because you can see that the votes didn't occur. So fair enough. Whether or not that's a violation of some agreement is who knows. But it's a true, descriptive statement about what happened historically. Yeah, that people weren't too happy about that, and they've just changed all the allocations again. So, okay, you know, interesting. Um, that whole thing is
Well, I
confusing to
mean,
me. It was originally going to be what, like an Aave fork, which is straightforward. You just fork it and go. But yeah, that's not really the way any of this has gone, and it keeps evolving from point to point. There's a bunch of interest coming in on the stablecoin, so maybe this is just all explainable by small, not maybe the most sophisticated financially team in the world, pivoting to whatever areas generate the most revenue. And, we're going to do a borrowing and lending protocol that's a fork of Aave. Oh, but our stablecoin's making, $10 million a month in interest. Let's just do that. Okay. I don't fault people for
yeah,
following that. Like,
yeah.
it's the way financial institutions work. Um, but, the lack of on-chain governance votes is kind of entertaining. The token's down dramatically. So that's maybe not surprising if there's a constant pivoting going on.
Well, general market conditions there are some troubles in the
It's
Middle East
funny.
at this
Lots
time.
of people making fun of Justin Sun for, publicly claiming he's been
I
scammed
know,
and
I know.
all
I've seen some of
the
those
time.
posts. And to be fair, I mean, and I'm not saying that the two are connected. There were a series of legal actions brought by the U.S. government that were dropped against him, roughly around the same time. And then there have been allegations that were made, not me making these allegations, but there are allegations being made that he paid for what he got, and now
Sorry, you
ups
mean he got what he paid for?
he got what he paid. Yeah, he got what he paid for, and now he's
Yeah, I
just
mean,
upset about the price. That's
the
what some
the
people are saying.
the dark view on that one is what's the Empire Strikes Back, right?
Yeah,
I'm changing the deal. Play
yeah.
after change the terms.
I'm altering the terms of the
Alter
deal.
the deal.
Pray I don't alter it any further.
Yeah.
Well,
I
which
mean,
is yeah. I mean,
it,
if I were him, I can understand why he'd be upset. But at the same time, given that I don't have any more legal problems and I can probably attend the World Cup in the United States this year, I that's not a bad thing.
I'm not sure even he can afford the public transport fares, but that's a totally separate podcast. Anyone that pays $150 to go to New Jersey deserves to stay in New Jersey. That could be the new slogan of the company. Yeah, I mean, look, what is it? What Paulie and the organization provide is protection for people who can't go to the Cups. Uh, if you're going to play at that level there, you should expect that that's the way this is going to go.
And you should expect that might possibly be the amount of what it costs.
I mean, yeah, I don't think it's a yeah. I
And
can
I
understand why he feels wronged, but I'm
I
kind of
certainly
not
don't think
surprised
being
that
extremely public about it does yourself any favors because, you know, what the hand that feeds you can also turn around and use the backhand to slap you in the face again if they so chose.
um sure,
You know,
maybe they don't
what's
have much more to threaten.
so I mean what's the point? But I don't know. It was interesting and the online the post but I want to move a little bit to the EU because this is pretty funny, to be honest. But tell us there's a bunch of publications. The Bank for International Settlements, the ECB, European Commission,
Yeah,
the
okay,
whole
so the Banque de France deputy governor, I think, the
yeah.
number two person, Beau, it's good that French. Anyway, he's he came out with some statements that are kind of consistent with lots of things we've talked about for a long time. So the EU has MiCA, which is
Yep.
the crypto asset, whatever, basic
Yeah.
regulatory framework that covers stable coins and a couple other things. And then there's also a much older, more foundational thing in the EU called the Payment Services Directive. And then there's a Payment Services Directive 2. So these are the things that govern, generally speaking, money transmitter type stuff. It's a
Hmm.
little bit different than the US, but it's vaguely the same thing. So um, MiCA only covers a relatively narrow collection of things. We and many people have talked about this many times, and there were concerns raised, nothing to do with us, right, in policy circles in Europe when MiCA was being debated as to whether this was actually going to be meaningful if you didn't cover enough stuff, whatever. We've also pointed out a number of products operating in Europe that flagrantly flout these
Yeah.
rules and just don't
Which extremely trivially circumvent the rules unless maybe that was
or just
never the
ignore them.
legislative intent. I don't know.
Some of them also just register in France, but don't, just crazy stuff.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
just don't care, right? And we'd also pointed out that, this type of governance stuff in Europe tends to move a bit more slowly, but it
True.
does tend to, the wheels of justice still grind fairly fine there. And also the structure of the legal system is such that when they decide to bulldoze in your direction, you're done. It's a different regime, right? The
Hmm.
bulldozer is very slow, but so there were there's been some disputes between the ECB and the European system of central banks. So the German central bank, the French central bank, whatever still exist, and they're parts of the European system of central banks, which is headed or is chaired by the European Central Bank. Uh, they'd been disputing with some of the European Union central government vehicles for a long time about how MiCA should really be interpreted and how strictly the payment services type stuff should apply to stablecoins, what stablecoins should be allowed, how much risk there is to the euro allowing stablecoins that essentially get around all the bank regulation. the ECB and those central banks supervise banks in Europe, but allowing a whole bunch of payment providers to exist outside of that supervisory framework. I mean, first of all, politically, that's not going to be of interest to the ECB and the European system of central banks because they're going to want to continue to control that stuff. And they also probably have a point that allowing, the payment services regulator in a small Eastern European country that's not a financial services center to just take over what was formerly handled by the European Central Bank and a number of large, well-staffed, experienced central banks probably means there's not going to be much regulation going. I think that's a fair observation. So specifically, the Banque de France deputy head said that they believe that MiCA compliant should be service providers should have to follow payment services directive 2. So essentially saying you're in the standard complete sort of European payment services thing as of pretty much presently. They've been warning for a while. They thought this was around now. This speech was coincident with that coming in. I suspect that there's somewhere between almost no and no compliance with that by these providers at all. Because why would there be?
Yeah.
They weren't required to, and financial compliance in Europe is extremely prescriptive, and it's not
Yep.
the kind of thing accidentally discovered you've done 99% of. Now, maybe you can get Delve to run your European compliance thing, and it'll all be totally fine with fabricated evidence. But I mean that kind of stuff generally doesn't fly in Europe. Right? That's just not the way the regulatory posture works at all. Also, there were concerns about the sort of use of non-euro and MiCA exempt stablecoins in the EU anyway, and how that might obviate all the regulation in the first place, and how they needed to, I believe the word he used was strengthen MiCA, expand what it covers to close a bunch of these loopholes and enforce against people who are, flouting the rules as written. I suspect that is what is going to happen because, and this is true basically everywhere in the Eurozone, right? The central bank is a well-funded, very independent, very well-respected. In some cases, it's the most respected part of the government because a lot
Yeah.
of these countries revolving door governments for a long time. I
Whereas the
mean,
central bankers and the team that runs the central bank continue to stay there through
I
successive
mean,
and
the Banca d'Italia may not have a wonderful history of maintaining the value of the lira and combating inflation in Italian finances and whatever, but no one has anything positive to say about that financial savvy of any Italian government back to the 40s. So, I mean, the Banca d'Italia has been around longer than, nobody's got nice things to say about. Well, maybe people have nice things to say about Berlusconi, but not exactly in that department. In a lot of these countries, it's Belgium similarly has routinely will have revolving door government things, but the central bank is still their central bank is a listed company, by the way. You can buy shares in it. Interesting tidbit. In France and Germany, these are very well respected organizations that have been around for a long time. Yeah, so they're likely to win that fight in the long run because the politicians will lose interest to move on. The winds change. So there was a lot of pro crypto stuff there, like there has been in the US. Presumably that cycle will turn simultaneously because that's the way politics works in the world. Right? The crypto folks are somewhat affiliated with the Orban supporters. European politics example.
hmm
Orban losing and likely that politics moving in that direction also means tacking away from the crypto supporters because again, that's the way these things work.
yeah.
So they're likely to win that one, and there's likely to be much tighter regulation over these things and no more escaping European bank regulation by saying you used a blockchain. Um, we'll see. They have very um, broad powers, much smaller banking systems in terms of numbers of banks. So the ability to cut people off is much. I mean, the American system is much harder to cut people off on purpose in reaction to it being easy in Europe hundreds of years ago. But it doesn't mean it's not still easy in Europe, right? So it's going to be interesting.
And I think
Whether
that
they'll be able to adapt and capture enough of the stuff quickly enough to make a difference is unclear. But
I think to some extent, and of course, Viktor Orban, who was the former president of Hungary, who was a
Prime
huge
Minister,
Trump prime minister, sorry, who was a huge Trump supporter, had a strong sort of pro crypto lobby and stuff like that. And as you rightly point out, and his exit stage left would also be an opportunity for those who have an axe to grind with some of these people, whether it's a political axe or it's whatever kind of axe you had to grind, may see some sort of backlash on a lot of these platform services that have been operating in the EU. But I mean, to say that the EU has
It,
tons.
it certainly means that the people in the European Parliament and European Commission and the
Mm,
related European Union central government organizations are less likely to want to talk to, work with, accept support from that direction.
yeah,
And since the central bank's positions have always been clear and they're not going anywhere, they will become the ones making more of the decision making because they were like a 50-50 fight
yeah.
6 to 8 months ago. So now it's going to not be even close to a fair fight or an even fight. Fair is the
Yeah.
wrong word.
So there's not going to be as much tension, and what you're going to see is, what some of the crypto lobby would decry as, death by regulation, and then they'll say that this is why, the Europe is so behind in innovation and stuff like that. But those are not, those are value judgments, I think.
I mean, the payment
Uh,
services directive is a pain in the ass. I'm familiar with this from banking a long time ago. I'm not saying it's not a pain in the ass, but like if you're going to make the everybody follow it, make everybody follow it.
yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it was curious that so many of them were able to not follow it for so long, and some of them frankly, quite blatantly. And I'm all for the rules being applied consistently across
Try
to a.
working more than 40 hours a week in France, right? The police will
I know,
find your
right?
car in the car park at the office. So
Yeah,
why are they
so
KYC money transmission?
I don't know, but
I mean,
yeah.
maybe those priorities aren't quite right. I think, but whatever you.
And on that note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your likes, subscribes, and comments. And we will see you again on next week's episode. Thank you very much. Bye bye.